Most people who have heard the phrase ground current assume it refers to a stray fault condition, something that happens when wiring goes wrong. Electrical engineers use the phrase differently. They use it to describe a continuous, low-level direct current flowing through the conductive soil of the Earth's surface at every point on the planet, driven not by any power system, but by the interaction between the Earth's magnetic field and charged particles streaming continuously from the sun. Engineers have called this phenomenon Telluric current since the French geophysicist Émile Mathieu documented it formally in 1850. Power utilities monitor it constantly because it disrupts their underground cables. It has never been explained to the general public in practical terms. Here is how to measure the telluric current flowing through your own soil, what the numbers mean, and what can be done with them. The problem with how telluric currents are discussed is not that they are secret. They are not. They are documented in geophysics textbooks, in power engineering references, and in the monitoring reports that utilities file with grid regulators. The problem is that they are discussed exclusively in technical contexts that assume a professional audience. The public conversation about energy production focuses on solar, wind, batteries, and fuel. The conversation that electrical engineers have among themselves about the measurable current flowing continuously through the soil of every property on Earth never crosses into the public domain in practical form. I want to cross it. I did not discover any of what I am about to show you. Carl Friedrich Gauss and Wilhelm Weber documented the Earth's magnetic field variation and its relationship to ground currents in Germany between 1832 and 1841. Émile Mathieu published the first systematic measurements of telluric currents in France in 1850, establishing that the ground current varied with time of day, geographic location, and solar activity. The British geophysicist Arthur Schuster published a comprehensive analysis of telluric current sources in 1908, identifying both solar particle streams and electromagnetic induction from the varying ionosphere as contributing mechanisms. The Scandinavian nations, particularly Norway and Sweden, built extensive telluric current monitoring networks beginning in the 1930s to protect their telegraph and telephone cable infrastructure, generating decades of continuous measurement data still used in academic research. The phenomenon has been continuously monitored and studied for 170 years. The barrier is not access to the knowledge. It is translation into practical form for anyone without a geophysics degree. Here is the science. The Earth's magnetic field extends into space and interacts with the solar wind, a continuous stream of charged particles emitted by the sun. That interaction induces electrical currents in any conductive material that the varying magnetic field passes through, including the conductive soil and rock of the Earth's crust. Those induced currents flow horizontally through the ground, varying in direction and magnitude with the angle between the local magnetic field and the solar wind direction, the time of day, the season, and the level of solar activity. Think of it like a wire moving through a magnetic field. The relative motion between the wire and the field induces a current in the wire. The Earth's conductive crust is the wire. The varying solar-driven magnetic field is the magnet. The current that results flows through the ground beneath your feet continuously, day and night, every day of the year, with higher intensity during solar storms and lower intensity during quiet solar periods. Here is the part that gets me every time I clip my measurement electrodes to 2 copper rods driven into my soil and watch the voltmeter reading. The reading is not zero. It is not a noise artifact. It varies predictably with time of day, climbing toward its daily peak in the mid-morning hours and declining through the afternoon, consistent with the solar angle-driven variation documented in the geophysics literature since Mathieu's 1850 measurements. That pattern, reproduced on my workbench from 2 copper rods and a sensitive voltmeter, is 170 years of geophysics, confirmed in my backyard on a Tuesday afternoon. Here is what you need to measure the telluric current on your property. And I want to be honest with you. This is genuinely $0 if you have 2 pieces of conductive metal rod and a voltmeter. You need 2 electrodes, any conductive metal rod at least 12 inches long. Copper pipe sections work perfectly and cost nothing from any plumbing scrap pile. driven into the soil at a separation of at least 10 meters. More separation produces a larger measurable voltage. My tested configuration uses electrodes 20 meters apart, oriented roughly north-south to maximize sensitivity to the east-west flowing telluric currents typical of my geographic location. You need a sensitive voltmeter capable of reading millivolts, which any multimeter with a millivolt range provides. Total cost for measurement, $0 with existing tools. For those interested in going beyond measurement to extraction, the materials needed for a simple telluric current collection circuit are linked in the description and first pinned comment. Here is the measurement procedure, the results from my 30-day measurement period, and what the numbers mean. Drive 2 copper electrodes into moist soil at a separation of 20 meters, oriented north-south. Connect the voltmeter positive terminal to the northern electrode and the negative terminal to the southern electrode. Allow the electrodes to stabilize for at least 30 minutes after driving, as the soil metal contact resistance decreases over time as the electrode settles into contact with the surrounding soil moisture. Record the voltage reading every hour for a full 24-hour period on your first measurement day. Here is where most people make the measurement error that leads them to conclude telluric currents are not present on their property. They use electrodes of different metals, copper and steel, or copper and aluminum, which creates a galvanic potential between the dissimilar metals that overwhelms the much smaller telluric signal. Both electrodes must be the same metal, and ideally, the same metal that has been aged in soil long enough that its surface oxidation layer is stable and not changing. Freshly cut copper shows a surface potential that drifts over hours as the surface oxidizes. Aged copper pipe sections that have been in contact with soil for weeks have stable surface potentials that do not drift significantly over a measurement period. Use the same metal. Allow stabilization time. These two requirements are what separate a meaningful telluric measurement from a metallic artifact. My 30-day measurement data showed a daily voltage variation between 8 millivolts and 47 millivolts across a 20-meter electrode pair, with the highest readings occurring on days of elevated solar activity, as reported in the NOAA Space Weather Bulletin I tracked in parallel. The average daily variation followed the expected pattern, peak in mid-morning and trough in late afternoon, with deviations correlating with cloud cover and ionospheric disturbances. On the 3 days of highest solar activity during the test period, peak readings reached 62 millivolts, approximately 30% above the solar quiet average. Here is the second place where most people mismanage their expectations of telluric current as a power source. They convert millivolt readings to power calculations and find that the available power density is extremely low, in the microwatt to milliwatt range per square meter of collection area, and conclude the phenomenon is impractical for any useful application. That calculation is correct for passive collection using simple electrode pairs. What the power utility engineers know and use in their interference mitigation engineering is that telluric currents are not uniformly distributed. They concentrate along geological features, specifically along conductively anomalous zones, where resistivity contrasts between soil layers create current channeling. Finding those concentration zones on a property using a simple 4-electrode resistivity survey, a technique documented in geophysical prospecting literature since the 1920s, can identify locations where telluric current density is significantly higher than the average. I found one such zone on my property through a simple 4-point measurement survey and drove my long-term monitoring electrodes there. The readings from that zone were 2.3 times higher than readings from electrodes at an arbitrary location 40 meters away. Place your bare palm flat on the soil surface between the two measuring electrodes during a period of high solar activity. You will feel nothing. The current density in the soil at these levels produces no sensation whatsoever at the skin. What you are measuring is entirely invisible to human senses and requires instruments to detect. That gap between imperceptible and measurable is what makes telluric current one of the most counterintuitive energy sources in this entire channel series. The energy is real, continuous, and globally distributed. It is simply below the threshold of any human sensory system to detect directly. When you are ready to integrate telluric current monitoring with Earth battery arrays, atmospheric collection, and other ground-based ambient energy systems into a complete ambient energy collection plan, the Energy Revolution system maps out exactly that integration. You will see a QR code in the bottom right corner of your screen right now. Point your phone camera at it and it will take you directly there. It goes deeper into coordinating ground-based and atmospheric ambient sources into a working property energy architecture than any single video on this channel can address. At day 1 of measurement, the diurnal variation pattern is established and the baseline output range is documented. At 1 week, the correlation with solar activity reports confirms that the signal is genuine telluric current rather than instrument noise. At 1 month, sufficient data exists to identify the peak measurement times and locations on the property for optimal electrode placement. At the 1 month mark, my dataset contained enough variation data to identify the geological concentration zone that produced readings 2.3 times higher than the average location. This is not really about telluric currents or geophysics or 1850. It is about the specific experience of clipping a voltmeter to 2 copper rods in your soil and watching the reading change with the sun's position in the sky. About 170 years of documented physics becoming visible on a display you are holding in your hand. About an energy source that has been flowing through the ground beneath every human habitation in recorded history without anyone in those habitations knowing it was there. I do not want you to drive electrodes into your soil near buried utility lines. Contact your utility or use a utility locating service to identify buried cable locations on your property before driving any electrode more than 12 inches into the ground. Shallow soil contact is adequate for initial measurement and carries no risk to buried infrastructure. If this telluric current measurement changed the way you think about what is flowing through the ground under your feet right now, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing practical wisdom that the modern world has tried to bury. Measure what the Earth has always been conducting. The next treasure of forgotten knowledge will